Welcome today on our Merill Expert Talk. I'm your host and fund manager at Merill Funds. I've managed portfolios from Geneva, London, and Valletta. We are back to my roots here in Geneva, and I'm delighted to introduce our special guest, Fabien Aepli, lawyers and partner at leading firms here in Switzerland. Before we dive into our conversations, a quick reminder, our usual disclaimer, follow at the end of the program as usual. For more daily insight, don't hesitate to visit our merillfunds.com or connect to our LinkedIn Merill Investors. So let's start our journey. Thank you, Fabien. It's a pleasure to have us here in your office. How are you today, Fabien?
Very well, thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to welcome you in our office.
Thank you, Fabien. So before we start our journey, I want you to speak a little bit about you, about your history, why you are where you are at the moment. I think it's quite important, especially for our audience. So let's take a moment to reflect on your parcours, as we say in French, and discuss about it.
Thank you, Marc. Happy to say a few words about that. I grew up in Fribourg, which is basically in the middle in between Geneva and Zurich. It's both French and German-speaking part of Switzerland. And this is where I started to study law because it's the best university. At least it's known to be the best university to study law in Switzerland. And this is the choice I made at that time. Given that I wanted to move a little bit, and I believed at the time, still believe today, it's very important to see other horizons, move a little bit. I also studied in Zurich during my time at university, and afterwards in St. Gallen to do a master at the HSG, and also in Turin, in Italy, to do an LLM in international trade law. So this is basically the academic background. I came to Geneva in 2003 to do my lawyer traineeship, and at that time, my first choice was for a small boutique law firm that does not exist anymore today, but that's not the point. It was really cross-disciplinary. My idea at the time was to say I want to see most fields possible in the law, doing stuff that I will probably not be doing years later, doing divorce, doing corporate law, doing criminal proceedings, litigation. Most experience you can take, it's good to have. And also something that I say sometimes to the younger lawyers that are joining us, it's not to rush for specialization. Specialization can come at a later stage, and probably it's not the best to try to get specialized in a field when you are too young. First, you're not necessarily sure that where your best feelings are, and also it's anyway good to gather most experience possible in very different fields. So this is what I did. I passed the bar exam 2 years later, 2005, and then I joined a boutique law firm in Geneva in early 2006. And actually, the two partners that I joined in 2006 are my partners today. So we have not discontinued working together since all that time. First, there was this boutique law firm in Geneva. A few years later, we became the Geneva office of an international law firm based in the UK. First, mostly, but not only. It was already in about 25 jurisdictions, and it had not a Geneva office. So we opened the Geneva office for this international law firm. That was a very interesting experience, and we founded the current law firm, Manager Attorneys at Law, with, as I've said before, the two same partners that were my boss in the earlier time in 2006. I became a partner later on, 2011. And we founded this new firm late 2015, early 2016. So Manager Attorneys at Law is named after one of the founding partners, the one which has the most visibility because of the mandates he's working on. We're talking about high-level white-collar crime mandates which have a lot of press coverage, so it makes sense. He was also the chairman of the Geneva Bar Association. So it really made sense to have the firm named after him. So this is what we did. On my side, I was working still with, I would say, cross-disciplinary at the beginning of my career as an associate, meaning I was doing a lot of litigation, I was doing corporate work, I was doing commercial agreements, and actually this changed a little bit to narrow a little bit my fields of activities when I became a partner. That was in 2015, as I've said. And at that time, basically, I stopped doing litigation and I focused on corporate law and commercial agreements. And something that was added in the meantime was financial regulation. So in these years, we're talking about financial regulations for traditional finance. So we're talking about banks, we're talking about asset managers, we're talking about distribution of collective investment schemes. So this kind of business that I've been working on. And this is basically how we went to the founding of the new firm, which was active as from 1st January 2016. This is when I started.
Thank you very much, Fabien. It was very an interesting journey here. Now let's discuss a little bit, and I will ask you one question, and why you start your journey with digital asset and fintech. I think probably our audience is curious to know how's the things going, how's your transitions as, I will say, a normal lawyer, sorry to say that, but moving in these directions of regulations and more on the tech side. So please tell us more about this and why you start your journey there on the tech side.
Sure, thank you for the question. That was actually at the same time as we founded a new firm. So we were active early 2016, and this is where I met the first client that was about to launch a project in the blockchain field. At that time, I have my three pillars of activities, which were corporate law, commercial agreements, and financial regulation. And this is the reason why a very good friend of mine, actually my best man, he referred to me a colleague of his, which was about to launch this project in the blockchain field. So at that time, I had read a few articles about this, but I had no experience in this field. And one of the first sentences he said to me was, I would like to tokenize an artwork. Are you familiar with all these things, and can you help me in this? And so my answer was sincere. I said, no, I'm not familiar with these things. I know barely about what you're talking about, but I'm happy to dig into this and try to support you the best I can, because the underlying fields were indeed within my field of activities. Made sense in that meaning. When I started doing this, something I've always been doing since the first time as a trainee lawyer, afterwards as an associate, it has always been important to us, the way I've been also taught with my previous bosses, and afterwards when I was working with partners. It's always to have a good, a more than decent understanding of the underlying business of the clients that we have. If we have a client that is having a project in this field, we can assist him, support him for corporate, for commercial matters, for financial regulation. But if we do not have a decent understanding of the underlying business and what we're talking about, at least we will not be able to deliver the highest quality service that we could deliver with such understanding. So I spent some time in digging into this on myself without charging the client for that. That was part of my own education journey in this. I found this field pretty fascinating. Sometimes a little bit dizzy as well to see all the possibilities that were behind that. But I had to come back to legal concepts. And at that time, understanding what was the idea with the tokenization, it's a very actual topic, right? The real world assets tokenization. So this was part of the project he had in 2016 already. And when I tried to understand how to qualify tokens under my law, my jurisdictions, which is Swiss law. So I had some difficulty in being able to qualify what are we talking about, what is this from a Swiss legal perspective when we're talking about tokens. So we spent some time in looking into this, making some analysis, and I would say in this respect it has been helpful a few years later, not much later, but I was in the early 2018. This is when the Finma, the Swiss Financial Market Supervision Authority, came with the guidelines on ICOs. It's still the name they have, these guidelines. They are very useful, but the name seems pretty odd after a few years, given that no one is talking about ICOs anymore since later 2018, 2019. But anyway, at that time, early 2018, it was very useful to have these guidelines that were making some categories of tokens. So to help people understanding that a token can be different things, and obviously the categories that most people know with the utility tokens, the asset tokens, including security tokens, and the payment tokens. And it's important to make these qualifications, not only because jurists and lawyers love distinctions and categorizations. That's probably true, at least from part of it, but mainly because the implications are very different depending on what kind of token we're talking about, and the implications from a regulatory viewpoint can be very different in terms of licensing requirements, anti-money laundering requirements, among others. So it can be very, very different. So that was the first experience I had in the blockchain field, and afterwards talking about that with some people that was around. Then I had also some very old good friends from the time I was in Fribourg. Some people had been playing basketball for years that were also in Geneva and working in the blockchain field, and that was kind of a natural match to say, oh, why don't we work together?
As we know, this year Ethereum celebrates its 10 years presence and its foundation here in Switzerland, and especially in Zug. Probably one of the reasons why Finma, so the Swiss regulator, was quite proactive on those directions with the implementations of Ethereum's foundations in Zug. I mean, what is your view on that questions, and how you see Finma and why being so proactive at that time when in 2014 it was not so popular? It was for limited people know exactly what they did and what Ethereum was doing. So probably here the audience will be curious to know their approach and why they started to have implementing this guidance.
Thank you, Marc. Interesting question. The first, it's rather telling that, like many people, when you're talking about the Swiss regulator, Finma, I used to be precise about the words we're using, and Finma is the supervisory authority, and the primary role of Finma is the supervision. And by the way, the A in Finma, it's a German abbreviation, and the A stands for Aufsicht, and that means supervision. So the primary role of Finma is really supervision. It's also very active in licensing, in enforcement, and also in regulation. That's true. So I'm not saying there is no regulation coming out from Finma. Obviously there is. I'm just saying that the primary role of Finma is the supervision of the financial markets, which is something that is important for the role of this authority. Now it is true that Finma has been rather proactive on this field. It is rather unusual, I would say, in Switzerland in general, and with Finma in particular, maybe less with Finma, but in Switzerland it's rather unusual to have this proactivity from an authority, especially talking about some technological innovations that were very recent at the time, indeed, after 2014 foundation of the Ethereum Foundation in Zug. And I'm pretty sure this played an important role in Finma being active on this. That was very early days. There was also at the time when there had been many ICOs. The reason why it's called guidelines on ICOs, it's because at the time it was a bit the ICO fever, which was somehow unreasonable, or maybe I can take away this somehow. It was unreasonable. What happened with most ICOs? There were many very serious and good ICOs, but also many less serious ones, which have been successful at some point. So it was good also for this to see Finma being active. Finma had also a Fintech desk, meaning there was a spokesperson that it was possible to turn to, and with some keywords that we have been using are the non-action letter. That what it means when you have a project and you want to send a letter to Finma to describe in details the project you have in mind, in principle to set out also the legal analysis that you are making out of this project, and you wanted to double check with Finma that the understanding of the regulatory and legal implications are seen the same way as you are. So it looks a little bit like some ruling decisions that you can get from tax authorities, but that's from the supervisory authority. And this is something that also is rather recent, and it's good to see Finma being active in this field. It also shows that the new players in that field were also under scrutiny. So Finma was on a learning curve, like everyone, and wanted to see what was happening with an early understanding that there was potential in this technology. And this is important because if there is potential, probably it will play an important role in the financial sector. And if it plays an important role, the supervisory authority needs to make sure that it can follow the pace, and it can indeed supervise the market. And because obviously you can supervise if you do not understand. And since then, Finma has remained rather active with digital assets. In recent years, two examples that we can have recent examples. One was about staking, and the last one was about stable coins. Not always in a very friendly way for the market, I would say, rather being pretty restrictive. And with staking, it changed. So the first approach by Finma was very restrictive, and after a consultation, it has been a little bit more flexible with some nuance and some differentiations, which was welcome for this. For the stable coins, I think the discussion should still be ongoing, because for now the position taken by Finma is pretty strict, and it's not fully sure what will be the impact on the financial market in Switzerland. But if I come back to what I've said about the role of Finma, primary role supervision, but also a role in licensing, a role in enforcement, and a role in regulation, you do not see within these four tasks something like fostering the market or trying to support financial players. That's not one of the role of Finma, and that's normal that it's not the main concern about Finma to help people that are active and players who are active in the field.
Thank you, Fabien. Now, just to come back on an interesting question here, you say Switzerland is quite well positioned and etc. But how is your view? Because to put the things in perspective to Europe in this case, and after maybe we'll discuss about US. As we know, US have been adopting ETF Bitcoin and now ETF Ethereum. Just want to give your view and how you see the future of Switzerland and how's the regulation on that side, knowing like to be an early adopters, especially on the regulation side. But do you think it will continue, or Switzerland will still continue to attract investors, or bring also a good regulation? How is your view on that side?
That's a good point, Mark. Always important to put things in perspective. First, I think we need to be careful a little bit in Switzerland. In terms of digital assets, blockchain, cryptocurrencies, I think Switzerland has been pretty lucky because no one really anticipated the Ethereum Foundation coming to Switzerland in 2014. And this has really played a major role in what has happened afterwards and what is still happening today. And sometimes I think we need to be careful in Switzerland not to take over too much following on this and what happened. I mean, this is not an advantage that will last forever. In terms of regulation, Switzerland has been early adopter, has been pretty fast. ICO guidelines, as I mentioned, but we're talking about guidelines. We are not talking about a legal act. We are not talking about a genuine regulation. We are talking about guidelines. I'm not saying they do not play an important role. They were useful. They played a rather important role. What I'm saying is that if you are looking for blockchain, digital assets, DLT legislation in Switzerland, there is not that much. We do not have a piece of legislation that would be as comprehensive as MiCA in the EU, for instance. And I'm not necessarily saying we should do this. I'm just saying that I think that it is not because Switzerland has been able to play such a role, thanks to many factors, including having a legislation that is mainly principle-based, so pretty flexible towards new technology. And by the way, technology neutrality is also one of the important features of Swiss law. And this has played a role. This has helped Switzerland to adjust, to adapt to the new technology without having to have new legal acts to in order to cover all these new technological aspects. So this is something that is important. But maybe Switzerland is not as attractive as some people still believe. It has many advantages in terms of stability, in terms of tradition, including financial traditions. So for the traditional finance, it's very solid, and this is playing an important role still today. And I'm not saying this is not the case. I'm just saying that in terms of booming, if we look at what is happening in the US, but maybe more interestingly, what is happening in Asia, in countries like South Korea, in countries like Singapore, I think they're making a much bigger push than we are. And we need to be careful not to rest too much on what has happened and say, oh, Switzerland is so well placed, it's a good place. I think it's still a good place, very good place to do business with digital assets, but we need to be careful, and the role and the relationship with the financial supervisory authority is not always easy. It's not always easy to have the most important players around the table in order to discuss the concepts, the requirements, and with AML playing a major role. And this is normal. It will continue to be so, but it's important to have the most important players around the table to make sure that the financial regulatory authority they understand what they talk about, and we can move together. But so long story short, to say, still very good, still good position in Switzerland, but be careful, and we need to keep an innovative mind. We need to keep helping attract interesting business in the digital space, and we cannot hope too much that what has happened so far would help us for a long time.
Thank you very much, Fabien, for this part one. It was really a pleasure to discover you, to discover your view, your visions, and I hope the audience like it. And for sure, if you want to see more, please stay tuned, and the episode 2 will come. Thank you very much, everyone, for this episode 1. Thank you.